Environmentalists and transportation advocates are trying a new way to show the benefits of less driving. A new report by MASSPIRG and Transportation for Massachusetts calculates the advantages of a 1% decrease in vehicle miles traveled. The report was released around the same time as a signature drive to go easy on fare increases for the MBTA. To tell us about the report are two guests from MASSPIRG, Campaign Director John Olivieri and Staff Attorney Kirstie Pecci. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Great, thank you for having us on.
John, you're the national leader of a campaign looking at transportation, and you picked this number, 1%. People might be saying, could 1% really make that much difference?
Sure. So at 1 percentage point decrease in the annual change in driving makes a tremendous difference over the course of the next 15 years. Our study takes a hard look at the economic, environmental, and public health benefits that would result from such a decrease. And what we found is that actually they're pretty stark. About $20 billion saved over the next 15 years, about $2.3 billion annually by the year 2030. Those savings would chiefly come from a number of different places. Some of those savings would come from less money spent at the pump. Some of that savings would come from less road repair. Some of that savings would come from decreased vehicle repair. And so, yes, it does make a big difference.
Kirstie, what kind of things do you have to do to make people cut back on the driving that much?
Well, I think we want to look at this and not think of it as a people should eat their vegetables message, more of a we, the Commonwealth, have to do a better job of providing choices for folks so that it's easy for them to say, I'm not going to drive and I'm not going to own that second vehicle. Maybe I'm not even going to own that first vehicle. Instead, I'm going to take the T, I'm going to take the bus. There are sidewalks now so I can walk. There are options for me to bike. And you know, we need to be making those choices and be making project selection choices that that will allow folks to do that, especially if we're going to meet our 2030 goal of tripling the biking, walking, and transit use in the Commonwealth, which has been set at the state level.
John, break down some of these expenses because
sure.
I live in the city. I pay more than $2,000 a year for a car that I don't drive to work 5 days a week, and somehow that feels like a lot of money.
Sure, that is a lot of money. For most people, having a car is a major expense, and it can be a more substantial expense than just about any other monthly household expense. And what we did in this report is we took a hard look at the other costs that people don't often consider. The cost to road repair, the cost to maintain your vehicle, the cost when you fill up at the pump, the cost to the environment when you consume all of that gasoline, the cost to individuals as they inhale emissions that are full of air pollution. In fact, our report actually found that cost could be as high as 53,000 lives lost prematurely every year. And so what we wanted to do is we often hear about the cost of projects, but we never hear about the value of something. And so we wanted to quantify what the value of decreased driving was and what would happen in a scenario where the state actually passed smart policies that held down future driving by increasing the investment in public transit, biking and walking, giving folks more options so that they can opt to only have one car, that they can take public transit to get to work. And what we found in this report is that those savings and those benefits are really substantial.
Kirstie, talk about health, because it's not just the health of the person who drives less. One of the things you pay for insurance, one of the main reasons they tell me it's so expensive is I got to cover health bills for people who might get into collision.
Right, absolutely. And that's something that I think all of us know someone who's passed away because of a car accident. And certainly all of us know someone who has been hurt severely because of a car accident and therefore cannot work, or is suffering and therefore needs repeated therapies throughout the rest of their lives. This is not to say that we're going to be able to eradicate those costs immediately, and this is only looking at that 1% decrease in the growth rate over those 15 years. But we can do better, and if we look at the projects that we're talking about, we hear, as John said, in the paper every day, the cost is going to be this, the cost is going to be that of these various projects. In order to make a sensible decision, we have to see how many cars and how many riders are we taking off the road for that. What are we actually paying for? And if we can say this many folks are going to be able to not drive that day, we will also then be able to say this many folks will not possibly get in a car accident that day. I drive in from Sturbridge a couple days a week into Boston, and it can be hair-raising. It really can. And I really hope that folks will not have to do that across the state.
If I could just put a little bit of an even finer point on that, our report finds that an average of 106 injuries occur a day in Massachusetts. And so one thing that we did is we calculated what the savings would be if there were fewer collisions. Savings not just to the individual, but also savings to businesses. businesses. So if there are people that are in less traffic accidents, those are less missed days of work, and that has a ripple effect throughout the economy. So as we think about these savings, we need to consider their savings to the individual, their savings to the state, and their savings to businesses. So really anybody can benefit, and that's just the economic side of things. That doesn't even take into consideration the emotional turmoil on friends and families that are affected by these tragedies.
John, one other thing that's in play today, you know, we have the story that gets worse and worse about the Green Line extension. The problem is the monitoring of contractors. It seems the state can't do it right. I mean, people are going to look at that and they're going to say, why do we need this stuff?
Right. So there's always room for improvement. Like anything, we could always do it a little bit better. But that's not to detract from the underlying point, which is investment in public transportation is essential. That it carries with it significant economic, environmental, and and other benefits. And so we can't get discouraged by these kinds of setbacks. We have to take a little bit more of the long-term view, realize what other benefits come from investments in public transit, investments in biking, investments in walking, and understand that the long-term benefits really outweigh any short-term misgivings we may have.
Kirstie, what about some other incentives that could cut back on the driving? I mean, one thing that occurs to me, because I know you live outside the city, is that there are people who feel that in their town there isn't any parking space at the commuter rail station, but maybe if they drove halfway to Boston, there there's something for them. Maybe they wouldn't be driving as much.
Right, and I think that that's something that we need to continue to work on. As we look at the transportation system, we want to discourage people from driving all the way into the city. So that means that we have to do a better job of providing parking at those outlying stations, as you said. We also have to do a better job of providing incentives for folks who live kind of in that inner ring. Instead of, for instance, requiring that contractors provide a certain number of parking spaces, require that contractors provide MBTA passes, monthly MBTA passes. Those are things that are starting to happen, and those incentives, I think, can make a big difference in how people make choices about transportation. But still, the most important part is that initial investment so that the actual buses, trains, sidewalks, and bike lanes are there. Until those are actually there, people can't make those choices.
John, what about the size of the investment? Because we know the investment should have been made sooner. You just look at the red line, the green line, the orange line. But aside from having done it sooner, are we putting enough money up there?
Sure, that's a terrific question. We're absolutely not investing enough in these essential services. I think once we start quantifying the benefits that these services have, we see just how important that investment is. But equally as important as the investment is the reform to the system. We need to do better at spending the money that we already have. And so this report has a number of recommendations, and one of them is that we need to do a better job of incorporating our estimates for how we think a project will affect future driving when we make the decision to actually go ahead and build that project. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that there are a set criteria for how we choose projects, and that's great. That's a step in the right direction, and certainly an improvement over the longest in line approach that has been somewhat business as usual over the last few decades. But those criteria are insufficient. We don't consider the effects on future driving that a project would have, and we give way too little weight to important factors like health and the environment, which receive somewhere between 5 and 15% of consideration. So yes, more money is absolutely important. Last winter's snowstorm showed that we need to do better at investing in public transit, but we also need to reform the system that we already have.
Kirstie, the other thing going on here is we're lucky enough for the moment to be in a growth period. We want that to continue as long as possible. So what does transportation mean to that? Transportation
is absolutely the lifeblood of economic growth. I recently spoke to a friend of mine whose office moved to an area of the city down by the seaport where there is not transportation. And it's a fantastic new office building, but it is making it very difficult for the people who live there to get in and out of the city. If we want that kind of development to continue, and if we want to have redevelopment of the city in places where we need it, and new businesses coming in, and young people staying in the city, retaining our talent, we need to make sure that those folks can get around easily. So this is absolutely crucial. That, never mind the economic impact of our students, and also making sure that folks who live in the city, our environmental justice population, can still get to all the services they need and still have that sense of community. all of that is really dependent on transportation.
John, what's the message here about fare increases? You know, I keep hearing that compared with other big cities, we're not so bad, so there's room for an increase, but what ceiling do you see?
Sure. So, you know, I think the most important thing is that we need to make public transit as available as possible to people, because there are such substantial benefits that be gained. And so when we do things like raise fares, we make it harder for people to take public transit. We make it less available, and so we realize less of those benefits. And so as we consider, you know, what additional fare increases we should have, we need to keep the value in mind, not just the cost. And as this report does, it quantifies that value, and it is substantial.
Yeah, if I could add too, Chris, the 5% fare cap, the every 2 year 5% fare cap that was set by the 2013 legislation, transportation legislation, is really important. First of all, because it is something that you can count on, that folks will be able to budget for and know that there'll be a 5% increase over 2 years. And also that slight increase over time means that we won't be trying to play catch up in 10 years because we haven't made any increases. If you try to increase too quickly, you lose riders. And losing riders can be sometimes the most detrimental thing to a transportation system's economic good. You know, we need more riders if you want the system to work and to pay for itself.
And I know you got this report online, so if people want to check this out, what's the best thing to do?
Go online and check it out, MASSPIRGeducationFund.org.
All right, thank you both very much, John Olivieri.
Great,
and
thank you
Kirstie
very
Pecci
much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
From MASSPIRG. We'll have more news in just a moment.